Hey everybody, this is Jason Hartless from the Ted Nugent Band, and you're listening to BODS Mayhem Hour.
Welcome to BODS Mayhem Hour, your source for all hard rock, heavy metal, new metal, alternative, punk, horror punk, hardcore, rock, and all local bands, with your host, John the Bod, a.k.a. the Bodfather.
Hey everybody, welcome to BODS Mayhem Hour. I'm your host, John the Bod, a.k.a. the Bodfather, and as always, I bring you guys awesome interviews. Today is an honor and privilege to have Mr. Jason Hartless. He is the drummer of the mighty Ted Nugent, and Ted Nugent's new album will be released late August, so we'll talk about that a little bit as we are into the interview. However, he has been playing drums since he was 6 months old, and recorded his first album with rock legends Corky Laing of Mountain, Richie Scarlett, Ace Frehley Band, and Jim McCarty, Cactus, The Rockets, Mitch Ryder, and the Detroit Wheels. In 2007, at the age of 12, Jason started touring with former Uncle Kracker guitarist Brian Scram. So we're going to be talking to him about all this stuff. So how you doing, man?
Hey man, how's it going?
Doing awesome. Glad to have you on the show, and congrats on playing drums for Uncle Ted out there.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we're wrapping up my third year with Ted here, and I can't complain. And it's such a great bunch of guys, and amazing group of musicians and crew that I get to work with every day.
So let's jump right into this, my man. You've been playing drums since the age of 6 months. We could safely say you were born with drumsticks in your hands. Does your parents have a cool story of you possibly starting, playing drums, or knew when you wanted to say, well, he's going to be a drummer possibly when he grows up?
Well, my dad was a professional musician, around the Detroit area about the time I was born. And, so the drums were always in the house. And, about the time I was 6 months old, I would, go downstairs and just bang away on the kit. And then, it really wasn't until I was about 3 years old that, my parents kind of noticed that I was kind of getting a little more serious about it and playing the full kit. So around that time, my dad hooked me up with a lot of his musician friends in town to just jam and play with me. And then by the time I was 5, I started doing my first pro gigs, around Detroit, playing covers.
Now, you were discovered by Richie Scarlett, which is with the Ace Frehley Band, and drumming legend Corky Laing, and I hope I pronounced his last name correctly.
Yep.
He's
well, my dad was he's one of those salesman guys. I always laugh. He can, you can stick him in front of a tree for 4 hours and he'll never run out of something to talk to. So he's one of those hustler and bustler guys, and his band used to tour a lot with Ace Frehley in the early '90s. Mm-hmm. So he became really close, friends with Ace and Richie, and then him and Richie became like brothers. So when I was born, my dad made Richie my godfather. So that connection, has always run deep. And late 90s to about mid-2000s, Richie was playing bass for Mountain. And, I was always a big fan when I was little. And when I started doing those cover gigs, we would actually play Nantucket Sleigh Ride by Mountain. So one gig, my dad, filmed and then sent a VHS to Richie. And Richie ended up showing Corky, and Corky called my dad up and was like, look, I want to work with this kid. So, about the time I was 7 until about 10 years old, Corky, who was living in Toronto at the time, would drive to Detroit, on weekends, and we would sit in a room with 2 drum sets and just woodshed for hours. And then started kind of working on a little record, of basically a project to get me my first experience in the studio, and the record kind of turned into, getting Richie on the record, and then we got, Jimmy McCarty, who's, such a legend in Detroit, and oddly enough is Ted Nugent's all-time god, guitar influence. So, it was a really, really cool experience, and, it was, again, my first kind of intro to being a studio musician.
So working with Richie and plus Corky on this band after recording your debut record, how much of an influence and impact was this for you continuing on as a musician? Saying, yeah, I think this is something that I want to build on. How much of an impact did they make on you after that?
Well, I mean, a ton, because they were always, and again, the record was really kind of a excuse to kind of teach me the ropes at a, really young. This is how you be a pro. This is how you work in the studio. This is how you do this, yada, yada, yada. So it really left a big impact in terms of setting me up to where when I got into different situations, I knew what I was doing.
This is something cool that I have a lot of respect for, because not only are you a musician, but you are a music business management student. So this is cool, at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Do you think musicians today have it easier since it's the digital era, or do you think it's harder either to learn to play or making albums these days?
Absolutely. It's we're in such an interesting time in this industry right now, especially with the evolution of streaming, and unfortunately, the payout of royalties for streaming is extremely low. So it's very, very hard for musicians to really make money nowadays unless you're on the road 365 days a year, or unless you're getting all your music licensed in film and TV. But I'm actually partners in a company called Prudential Music Group, where I'm overseeing 2 record labels and a publishing company. So, as I'm studying the field at Berklee, it really helps to, I'm able to work real situations into my classwork. And, one of our labels is very, very focused on vinyl. And, that's become one of the big viable resources in the industry that has really stepped up, especially, in the first and second quarter this year. Vinyl sales have jumped up 20%. Which is great considering, physical product relatively is going down. So, just trying to find, how this industry is going to change, kind of stay one step ahead of the industry change and kind of try to adapt as best as you can is really the toughest part of this business.
Do you think vinyl is going to come back and make a big surge and say, okay, forget CDs, which now I'm seeing CDs is not being made anymore, if I'm not mistaken? Do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. That again, like I said, one of my biggest focuses with my company is vinyl. We in the last year or so we've released 7 or 8 releases, and we're selling them like hotcakes, because I think the music consumer, because I've been a vinyl collector for many years, even before I was selling it as a business executive, but I think the consumer is now seeing the shift in, people want a product. They want a more or less a collector's piece, if you will, because the hot thing in vinyl now is, making sure that the packaging is, super elaborate, and making sure that it's some funky color, and, it adds that collectability, not just, oh, well, here's an album on CD, which the CD had nice packaging, but with a vinyl record, you can hang a vinyl record on the wall. It's a nice art piece if the artwork is good enough. Mm-hmm. Whereas digital music and streaming, which me as a consumer, I love, because I can access any song ever recorded, literally in my pocket. But you're not getting a kinesthetic value to it, because it's literally just music playing on a little box.
Let's take a look at the social media side, and I'm sure you've looked at the numbers and things like that. Do you think it's helping more bands out to reach out to more people to get their music out there? Do you think that it's helping them a lot? Especially you. I mean, I know you've been around for a while, plus you're playing with Ted Nugent, but getting more people to recognize you guys and listen to your music and newer bands and things.
Absolutely. It's definitely helped, in a lot of ways, in terms of making sure that, someone can market themselves, someone can put, the music out there. I mean, be honest with you, I'm not the biggest proponent of the DIY musician, which is really the hot commodity nowadays. I have the strong belief that in order for an artist to make themselves in the industry, they have to have a real team of professionals behind them that know what they're doing. Unfortunately, the music industry has become oversaturated with so much music, because there's so many bands, whether they're the greatest thing since sliced bread or they're just, average musicians, anybody can release music, which, again, for a musician is great. for music consumers, I feel like it becomes a little too much, a little too oversaturated to where, a lot of great music that should be marketed correctly kind of gets lost in the shuffle of things because they're getting bombarded with so many, new artists and new bands and new songs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like weeding through everything. It's oversaturated.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, social media has kind of helped that. But at the same time, social media, now that they're getting a little bit better, where basically you got to pay to advertise your music, which, in the long run, I feel like it should be something that has to be done. If you want to push yourself, you have to put money behind it, without a doubt. And that kind of goes back to where you should have top industry professionals that know what they're doing in order to break your band.
Now, you've worked with many musicians, but how much growth musically have you seen yourself go through since you've joined Ted Nugent, or has it just been more of a personal growth for you, man?
For me personally, I'm one of those guys that I'm always listening to new music. I'm always, I kind of look at listening and discovering new bands almost as market research for me as a industry executive and me as a musician. Because, discovering new bands, new artists, kind of what's out there is really what's going to keep, yourself kind of up to date and more in the loop of everything. Now, unfortunately, it's not, actually, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I'm kind of stuck in the lost old age of music. I listen to music mainly from the 40s to the 80s. So I'm not the biggest fan of modern music that's happening, but I still have to keep tabs on, who's the new hot artist and what type of music they're pumping out, so that, in case I ever get called for a gig or I'm developing an artist for said genre, I kind of know what's happening with other artists.
For those who are wanting to learn how to play drums or any instrument and are frustrated where they're at with it right now, what advice would you give to them, man, to say, hey, what would you say to them?
Listen to as much music as possible and listen to as many musicians as possible, because, and the hardest question that I'm asked almost every day in my life is, who's your favorite drummer? And that's really the hardest question, because my belief is that, you should never have one single favorite musician or favorite drummer, favorite guitar player, whatever. You should have, about 30 favorites and then about 100 musicians that you kind of follow and learn their style, because you build this melting pot that you can pick from. If you don't do that, if you're only concentrating on one, band or musician, you're really only going to sound like that person. Making sure that you're listening to and learning from as many different people as possible is key.
Speaking of that, how hard do you push yourself as a drummer, learning new beats, or just as a musician? How hard do you push yourself with this? Do you still push yourself today, or do you kind of just relax a little bit? Let's talk about that a little bit.
You never stop growing. Again, I'm one of those guys that, I try to listen to as much as possible and try to pick up as much as possible, because, really the day that you stop learning is the day that you die. I mean, it sounds, sure. It sounds harsh, but it's true, because you should never stop learning, even because when I'm home from touring, I'm one of the music directors at a School of Rock in Metro Detroit. And, I'm teaching kids that are 7 to 18 years old every single day. And, I learned something from them, so it's definitely something that you should never stop doing and always strive to learn more.
So let's talk about this a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong. You're doing PR for Scott Morgan's, the Rational Sonics Residev. I know I'm going to pronounce that wrong. Residevis band, and new album Rough and Ready, and plus Paul Moran's music director for Van Morrison. New album Smokin' B3. Are you doing PR for these folks? Yes or no?
It's actually my record labels who put it out.
Okay.
So I overseen the product of them.
Okay.
And we didn't do Scott Morgan's Sonic Rendezvous. We did the band The Rationals, which Scott was in the late 60s in Detroit, which were actually a very influential, blue-eyed R&B band that actually even Ted was influenced by. So those records, I overseen the projects of them.
So let me ask you this: how's it like to be behind the scenes of seeing it that way versus just being a actual drummer for just a band, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Well, you know, the working side of it, I should say, the behind the scenes deal.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, it definitely helps, you know, being an artist and currently an industry executive, you know, in the field. It really helps to be able to you know, compare and contrast both sides of the business, because, you know, anytime that I'm working on a deal for an artist, you know, for my company, you know, I have to kind of, you know, look in the back of my head like, okay, well, how can I be as fair as possible to this artist while still, you know, making sure my company is getting what we need? You know, unfortunately, we're in the days of 360 deals, and most of those 360 deals are really not artist friendly. So anytime my company works a 360 deal, we make sure that we're giving the most fair deal for both parties. You know, like we've even done 360 deals that, you know, end up being 50% between, you know, my company and the artist, which relatively is unheard of. You know, most of the time, you know, artists on 360s that are getting this full development package get, you know, the shit end of the stick with a very, very low percentage. So that's the biggest thing that helps with me being currently a musician in the industry, is that I'm able to kind of, you know, look at it as an artist perspective.
For you, what do you look for in a band that would draw you to them to say, hey, look, come to my record label? What is it for you that makes you have to take a chance on that band?
How commercial they appeal. And it's one of the more, and again, a lot of people, you know, are very anti-commercial, but I'm very pro-commercial, because that's how you make money. But you know, our vinyl label, Rouge Records, is very much into the reissue type stuff. So we're putting out music that was recorded in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. A lot of it's very niche. But any sort of development artist that we work with, we kind of, the first thing we look at is how commercially appealing is their music, is their image, you know, what do they have to grow, how's their backstory, and things like that.
So when you're working on an album and things like that, do you do anything differently during the recording process to maybe, you know, help keep your mind fresh and open to not let your music get stale? And do you push yourself even more, you know, from song to song on that album? I know, like you said, if you're not learning more, you're dying, as we should say. But let's talk about that a little bit when you're working on this.
Well, you know, being a studio musician and a hired musician, you know, I always try to make sure I'm giving the artist 110% what they ask for. You know, I've done everything from death metal sessions to funk sessions to big band Christmas albums, and you know, and then we got the new Ted Nugent record. And, you know, I treat every single session different, because, you know, me as a studio musician is completely different than me as a live touring musician, because it requires a lot different kind of mindset. And then it also requires, you know, you to be on your game 100% of the time, because you're recording. And you're also on, you know, the artist you're working for is dime. So I love being a studio musician, because it always keeps it fresh, because every single day you're recording something different. And honestly, most of the time when I record, I don't even hear the songs until literally 5 minutes before I record them. So that always keeps it really, really interesting and fun.
Now, I know you're the drummer with Ted Nugent now, but is there a show or a moment that stands out to you more, Jason, than any that you can be, you know, that you can recall being part of possibly? I know you did the tour. You was on tour with Motley Crue as one of the support bands, but is there any that stick out for you possibly? Honestly,
no. I mean, every single tour is a highlight. You know, I touring is what I'm made to do. You know, I always joke that if I was on the road for, you know, 12 months out of the year, I can do it. Because, you know, I look at it as I'm getting paid to travel the world and then sit and play drums for 2 hours. You know, so it's every single, like right now I'm standing in my hotel room in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and like I would not have come here if I wasn't touring. And you know, so discovering new places, being able to go places I might not have been able to go on. Like last year with Ted, we played for the U.S. military in Okinawa, Japan. You know, so like a situation like that was literally a once in a lifetime opportunity. You know, I would never have gone there as a tourist. So those type of experiences are what makes the job so fun.
We lost an iconic musician, Vinnie Paul, drummer of the mighty Pantera, Hell Yeah, Damage Plan, and Rebel Meets Rebel. I don't know if you've got had the opportunity to meet him, but do you have like a cool memory of seeing him play, or a story that you'd like to share, maybe, possibly?
I never got to see him play, but I had met him a few times. First time I met him was actually when I was opening for Motley Crue in 2009, and we had a couple days off in Las Vegas, and Vince Neil was opening up his rock bar called Feel Goods, which is now called Vamps. And so we had this big VIP grand opening type thing, and since we were one of the support bands, we were hanging in the VIP blocked off section, and Vinnie Paul was hanging. And, at the time, he was also a Pearl drums and Dorsey. So we sat and BS for a while about Pearl and, a lot of mutual friends. And he was a super, super down-to-earth guy and a hell of a player.
Yeah, we surely lost a legend in my book, for sure. Let's talk about the new album from Ted Nugent, if you can, for just a little bit. What are we going to get on this one? What can we expect from it, man?
Well, I might sound a little biased because this is, since I played on the record, but, I got to say this is, I think the Ted Nugent fans and even classic rock fans are really going to love this record because it returns to, Ted's iconic sound that he's always had, but, it was recorded in such an old school way. We recorded with all old school gear. We recorded it live together. So, each track, me, Ted, and the bass player, Greg Smith, sat in a room, and we learned the songs for like 2 days, and then we sat in the studio because we were booked to be in Waco, Texas for 2 weeks. But when we started recording, we recorded the drums, bass, and basic rhythm guitar tracks in 5 hours for the entire record. So, it was very much one of those things that, we were feeling really good. So Ted was just like, let's keep going. So, it's very, very, very old school feeling, sounding, and the songs are really, really, really great. So I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing the reaction of what all these diehard Ted Nugent and even classic rock fans have to say about the record.
That's awesome, because that takes me back to the days of when you hear of Johnny Cash or Elvis Presley recording at Sun City Records, if I'm not mistaken, in Memphis or Arkansas, something like that.
Memphis.
One of the old school recording studios. That's pretty damn cool, man.
Yeah, we cut the drums, bass, and there was very, very, very little overdubs done, on drums and bass. So almost every single track is about, a full take of the song. So it's not like we're sitting there splicing, all these parts together to make the song. Mm-hmm. And, watching Ted in the studio, I've worked with him for 3 years. And since I've been in the band, we hadn't done any studio work until this record. So, coming in the session, it was a very different situation because, Ted and the bass player, they didn't really realize, that I'm really a studio musician. So I'm treating recording that record very different than the drummer that they're used to playing live.
Sure.
I come in and treat it very differently. But, being able to watch Ted record his guitar solos in the studio was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen in my life, because the guy, just sits down and rolls off about 4 or 5 passes, and each guitar solo was unbelievable. So now we were at the, kind of the predicament of, okay, well, what's the best guitar solo? Because they're all so great.
Jason, I can say thank you, man, for your contribution as a musician and what you guys are doing in Ted Nugent. I support Ted 1,000%. I know people's going to hate me for that, but you know what? I truly believe in NRA and things like that. I'm a hunter. I'm in Kentucky. I love to hunt. I love to fish. So it's something that I truly, truly support. How can folks stay in touch with you? Buy some merchandise, get in touch with you for anything. How can they do that?
Well, you can find me on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, all that fun stuff. And then also jasonhartless.com. I always update with any, new cool things I'm doing. And also anytime I'm touring with, Ted or any other artist is always up there.
Before I let you go, good sir, would you care to do a promo for my show?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, this is Jason Hartless from the Ted Nugent Band, and you're listening to BODS Mayhem Hour.
Everybody stick around. We got some great music coming up, and you only hear these interviews right here on BODS Mayhem Hour and BODS Mayhem Radio Network. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yeah, thanks so much for the time.
See you later, man.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.